Yo, what is up, guys? So, as you know, Revenge of the Sith is returning to theaters, and a lot of people are hyped up. New fans, old fans, people who have turned away from the fandom, and people who have stuck with the Disney fandom of Star Wars, because Disney Star Wars, it has been an interesting era where most of the things that come out of Disney Star Wars end up falling flat. The corporatization is real. And it kind of took what made Star Wars special out of Star Wars. And I got a bit of a story that I've already told. I used to be very sold on Star Wars. I used to be part of a lightsaber club. I used to have a lot of Star Wars fandom friends. However, moving forward, it was around the time of The Last Jedi. I was part of a lightsaber group that was doing these shows, and they were trying to get contacted by Lucasfilm, which was an ambitious goal, but your average lightsaber club trying to get in contact with Lucasfilms or trying to get them to say, okay, why should we hire you? And that question with AI being released and is probably going to replace a lot of the visual effects artists, actors even, etc. It created friction where some of us had our boots on the ground and said, okay, well, why would Lucasfilm want to mess with us? What makes Lucasfilm want to look at some small-time lightsaber club and get us on board with them? It just kind of seemed like they were sucking up to Lucasfilm and Disney and everything Marvel. It was to the point where when we made our shows, every show's script seemed like it was the precursor to AI generation, where it was always a movie quote, from somewhere in cinema, like a Marvel movie reference, a Star Wars movie reference. There was no original premises to it. And I even brought that to the people who wrote the script. And I said, okay, if you want a chance of standing out, or at least on a local level growing, this is what we got to do. But obviously, that's when they started doing like coup d'etats and everything like that, where, leaderships were changed out. People were voted off the island. I just walked off because I knew they were going to try to get me out of them for XYZ reason. The games that we used to play with each other with the lightsabers got hard to do because, you'd have 40-year-old jaded adults swinging at these 20-year-olds trying to come in really hard. And, you would hear it from people who left the group. And they said, we left for XYZ reasons. You bring it to the leadership. The whole thing was just a disaster. It just kind of showed that the times were changing, not just on the movie aspect, but with the fandom, where they knew that there were people who were loyal to the mouse and people who weren't. And I think the people who weren't loyal to the mouse are the ones who are looking around saying, I told you so. With the whole thing playing out with the Alkalite that just came out. I haven't really watched that. I did like that one scene that I did look up where they bled the lightsaber crystal. In fact, one of my favorite things of new Star Wars lore right now is how a red kyber crystal happens, where you bleed the crystal, and that's how the Sith get it. But looking back, I'm glad I walked away from that, because honestly, I had filled all that empty space in my life with like other real life stuff. I kind of realized how sold I was on Star Wars and how big of a nerd I used to be. My posters, my lightsabers that I bought that eventually fell apart, and they were expensive. That money could have gone to something a little more useful. But I just kind of looked around and saw just how the hyperconsumption had infected my brain. And now, like years later, I'm purged from it. But now moving forward, you see something like Revenge of the Sith come back to theaters. And after all the drama and fighting that has gone on around the fandom, this might just be the thing to return to form. And I mean truly return to form. Because I think it was like a recent Lucasfilm interview where he doesn't like what happened to his creation. I believe so. I don't know how recent that interview was, but I was looking at George Lucas interviews leading up to it. This might be a step in the right direction. Now, obviously, there's a lot of other entertainment industry problems that people are calling out. This is not the end-all, be-all, but I think it's the first step in the right direction if I'm being overly optimistic. It looks like it's the step forward, as long as there's not a bunch of steps back. But, we remember the prequel trilogy, and I'm going to bring in another movie that recently came out that's going through the same thing with the backlash and the blaming of the fans that The Last Jedi did. Snow White, right? How this is going on currently, how movies are blaming the audience for critiquing it or saying that they're the problem for not liking the movie or something. Like, I understand that when I put out content, it's up to the viewer to decide what it is they like about what I'm saying, etc. Once I post it, I have no real control over it. The only thing I can control is like really what I'm saying, but how people respond to it, all that stuff. And for those of you who have negative opinions, okay. Everyone reserves the right. Not everyone has to like my content. I'm not a demigod. I don't have that power. But I really wish the entertainment industry would at least acknowledge that more often, because I think that's how we get mid-entertainment today, that a lot of people are seeing the heavy blows to what used to be. So like when you have something like Revenge of the Sith, where it had its flaws, less than Attack of the Clones and a little less than Phantom Menace, right? But the flaws were still there in Revenge of the Sith. And although it wasn't a perfect movie, there was no blaming the fans for the critiques. In fact, there's stuff that nowadays, in retrospect, the cast at the time can look back at that movie and say, okay, that wasn't the best move. Or like, let's bring in another movie, Spider-Man 3, Sam Raimi. He knows that is the weakest link in his trilogy. And Emo Peter dancing up and down the streets, all that stuff, he acknowledges that. He laughs about it. But it's like through that acknowledgement of the flaws, it didn't really have a whole lot of short-term ramifications. People still paid to watch those movies. They paid a lot of money to go watch those movies. But in the future, it's almost like we celebrate it more. There's a lot of video essays talking about Spider-Man 3 being a way better movie than we remember it, because we acknowledge and can look back at the bad times and laugh about it. It's like when you embarrass yourself at school, and then during the high school reunion, you guys are like, hey, remember that time? Oh, yeah, no, that was embarrassing. And then, like, you acknowledge what it was. You don't get defensive, but you can move on because you've made yourself better after that thing. Where Spider-Man 3, Revenge of the Sith, Attack of the Clones, all those ones, there was no Hollywood executives telling us, hey, this is your fault for not liking it. This kind of authoritarian, like what we have to say or else kind of stuff that has split up fandoms, and I know from first-person experience, but it might also get us to not try so hard. The thing I've realized when you produce art, it's always better when you're not overthinking it and you're letting the creativity just flow, and that's the one tone about Revenge of the Sith that I really like, is it just was what it was. It didn't try too hard, but it hit more often than it missed. And I think the better thing is then next time Star Wars wants to pump out some entertainment, it is kind of like the Jedi Fallen Order games, which is like the bright spot of Star Wars that I enjoy to a T. Like those games were perfection on a storytelling. So with modern Star Wars, there is hope. There is ways to make very deep stories. Like Fallen Order, how the antagonist came to be. I'm making this video with a bit of a sore throat right now, so my pronunciation is even worse than it usually is. But, I'm going to say it again, the antagonist, right? It was very well written. All the main characters were well written. And then when it came to Jedi Survivor, they even knocked it out of the park even further and took old concepts and kind of brought them into the modern era of like turning to the dark side or reaching a breaking point. That Fallen Order and Jedi Survivor, they were such cliche, but they made cliche work. But like I'm saying, I have so much good stuff to say about those games because it just shows that there's hope. And maybe when they release another movie, they could really make something where we go, wow, that's what we want to see more of. Because in a perfect world, I would like to see that, where studios pump out movies that, might be a little flawed, but we appreciate them. And then 5 years ago, we could laugh at the parts that fell flat, but celebrate the parts that went so well. Have all of it be, awesome. I mean, there's always going to be critics out there. There's always also going to be AI out there. And I know we don't live in a perfect world, but like I'm saying, man, the bottom line of this video is that this might show us once again and remind us how it was done, or get us to look back in that childhood era where we could laugh, because we are in the dark ages of entertainment. The Snow Whites, the Assassin's Creeds right now. The internet's obviously talking about all these things, and it's not looking at it in a good light. But maybe, just maybe, and I might be being overly optimistic. Usually I am. I'm not relying on these multi-billion-dollar corporations to have a change of heart. But maybe it's a populist movement that could turn us towards what we used to love so much. But I'm looking forward to April. And, well, may the Force be with you, because I will once again be seeing all of you guys in the theaters. And even if I bump into some of my old colleagues who we had the beef with over should we cater to Lucasfilms or not, just know I hold no resentment towards you. And hopefully we could just enjoy the movie that made us such fans together. And, well, maybe get back to that stage of love. But that's all I got to say. Peace out. And may the Force be with us all, always.